Hello and welcome back to Chapter 7, Consideration and Form, Part 6. We last left off in the case Gilbert Steel versus University Construction. In Gilbert Steel versus University Construction, a pre-existing contractual obligation cannot be constituted as a consideration on its own. Both had an existing contract. However, the supplier increased the price of the steel bars. The purchaser orally agrees with the increase. Both parties had a contract drafted, but it was never executed. The supplier then sues the purchaser for a breach of oral contract. In this case, the judgment was for the defendant. The promise or performance of the duty, pre-existing duty to the promisor does not constitute a valid consideration. The forbearance from breaking the contract does not constitute a valid consideration. No consideration in modification of the contract, since the only new thing is the price. There was no consideration flowing from the defendant. There was a new contract when they agreed on the new price. However, there was no no given in exchange for the new high price. All right, in Gago versus Skogal and Company, Gago provided a service for a reduced wage over the course of the war. He then argued to sue for the full wage. In this case, the judgment was for the defendant. There was no consideration. There was a new contract being created. The mutual promise, the mutual promise says to abandon the first agreement was implied, page 247. If parties agreed to terminate the original contract and replace it with a new one, the pre-existing duty under the original contract is terminated. Both parties had formed a new contract to accept the decreased wages during the course of the war. In Williams versus Ruffley Brothers and Nickel Construction, the Ruffley Brothers hired A. Williams to complete some carpentry work. Williams calculated that he would need additional financing to complete the project. Thus, both parties agreed to more financing. Broffrey claimed that there was no consideration and they refused to pay. Judgment was held for the plaintiff because pre-existing contractual obligation can constitute as a consideration if the promise to fulfill the pre-existing obligation confer a practical benefit on the promisee. The practical benefit will constitute a valid consideration for the promise to pay an increase in the price. Okay, part 4, next part, section 4, partial payment of a debt. In the case Folks versus Beer, it was ruled that a promise to pay less than the total amount of the debt is not on its own valid consideration. Creditor is bound by an undertaking to accept partial payment in full settlement of any debt. Both parties must do something new, not just payment of a smaller sum. Both parties must do something different. Partial payment to creditor is not consideration for creditor's promise to accept. Payment to a lesser sum rule is not sufficient in satisfying the whole unless there is some kind of consideration for this new promise. This case established the rule which prevents parties from being released from its obligation. In the British Russian Gazette and Trade Outlook Limited versus Associated Newspaper Limited, quote, accord and satisfaction is the purchase of a release from an obligation arising under a contract or tort by the means of any valuable consideration, not being the contractual performance of the obligation itself. The accord is the agreement by which the obligation is discharged. The satisfaction is the consideration which makes the agreement operative. Unquote. In Reselect Move Limited, the defendant owed the Crown back taxes and offered to pay the Crown £1,000 each month. The agent for the Crown asked for a proposal to collect the money in arrears. There was an agreement between the company and the Crown. The Crown demanded the entire payment in arrears. A promise to pay less than the total amount of the debt does not constitute a valid consideration. An offer to fulfill an existing contractual obligation is not good consideration for a new agreement. The taxman desperately tries to wind up Select Move and for failing to pay its debt. However, both parties had agreed that the payment would be made by installment. The taxman claimed that the agreement is unenforceable and they cannot be held accountable to that agreement because Select Move had offered no consideration. Okay, so in the case Sabri versus Tripp, the case Sabri versus Tripp support the principle of Foote versus Rawlings. In Sabri versus Tripp, the creditor agreed to receive £500 in exchange to release debt of £300. The acceptance of the 3 promissory notes and negotiable instrument is a satisfaction of the debt of a greater amount. This agreement is binding for the reason given by Baron Alderson at page 37 and 30, at paragraph 37 and 38. Quote, a man may give in satisfaction of a debt of £100 and a horse of the value of £5, but not £5. Again, if the time or place of payment be different, the one sum may be a satisfaction of the other. Let us apply these principles to the present case. If for money you give negotiably security, you pay it in a different way. The security may be worth more or less. Okay, it is of uncertain value. Page 252. Alright, in Foote versus Rawling, Foote owed Rawling a large sum of money. Rawling offered to lower the monthly payment and the interest rate that Foote would have to pay him. Foote agreed to the new condition and wrote Rawling some post-dated checks. Under this new agreement, the new monthly payment and interest rate will be effective unless if any of the post-dated check bounce. If they bounce, the interest rate and monthly payment will revert to their original amount. There was an implied agreement that as long as the payment were flowing in, Rawling would not sue Foote. However, Rawlings did not sue Foote for the balance of his debt. The main issue was there any consideration given to Rawlings to forbid him from suing Foote. In this case, the lesser payment by different mode is sufficient consideration. Foote had not defaulted under the new terms of the agreement. The check constituted good consideration for the agreement. Rawlings should be forbidden to take action on those promissory notes. Foote had continued to perform its obligation under the new agreement. Thus, Rawlings' action to sue was dismissed. Appeal was allowed with cost. Alright, so next section here, we'll be looking into promise under seal. Okay, so until next time, you take care, and that's the end of this part. Okay, have a good day. Thank you.